welcome to our third episode of our webinar series, Navigating the Future, where we look at various areas of our society and how COVID-19 is affecting them. Today, we're going to be talking about equity and access in virtual learning, and I'm very excited to welcome back Dr. Monica Simonsen, who is the Director for our Masters of Arts in Teaching program, and Dr. Brandie Shatto, who is the Director of our Educational Technology program. And with that, I'd kind of like to start us off and jump into things. And so our first question is going to be for Dr. Simonsen. So we hear a lot about the fact that virtual learning is exacerbating equity issues in education. So can you elaborate on this for us?
Sure. You know, what we know is that schools are essential to our communities and provide more than just education or daycare. Families rely on schools for services and support, including food, healthcare, social services, libraries. We know that people of color are disproportionately affected by the virus, and so they face additional inequities related to healthcare. What we're seeing now is that the disparity of educational opportunity is really impacting the school's ability to respond to COVID and to transition back to in-person learning. So returning to in-person learning is, made more difficult when your community has run down school buildings with poor air quality and overcrowded classrooms. So certainly there are obvious disparities in terms of resources needed to simply access the instruction and curriculum. 30% of K-12 public school students, so that's between 15 and 16 million, live in homes that don't have a device or stable internet connection in the home. In the last web talk, we talked a lot about the challenges to creating a space that's conducive to learning at home. When a child shares a bedroom or is sharing space with large multi-generational families, finding a quiet space to learn can be difficult at best. Work obligations and language proficiency and prior education can impact a family's ability to really provide the much needed support for kids who are learning at home. So I'm a proponent of high quality virtual learning, but the rush to move content online has not really allowed for time to dedicate to curriculum development and sufficient professional development for our teachers. Many fabulous teachers, some of whom are teaching my kids right now, are struggling to engage learners, to monitor progress, and to differentiate the content so that they're making sure they're meeting the needs of all of their students. Just some examples are that students with learning disabilities and ADHD or executive functioning challenges may really just struggle to toggle back and forth between tabs and manage their time. So they're not submitting work doesn't mean that they can't meet mastery of the learning objectives, but that gap gets wider when they can't navigate that learning space. Students with social and emotional behavioral health needs are among the most impacted of the students because they're all missing those critical routines and interactions. And then, English language learners, they may be increasingly isolated from their language partners. So the list goes on and on. At the end of the day, public school really helps to level the playing field for kids. And these closures really exacerbate those inequities that already exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that these issues that students are facing are real. And as we've already said, they're getting exacerbated, more and more every day as people are sort of getting separated from each other. And, we're all trying to sort of work out all these problems that we have with, virtual learning. And for a lot of people, it's a really new thing, and it's sort of really hard to overcome. So can you talk also a little bit about the way that districts and schools have also tried to address these issues?
Sure. I mean, it's not all doom and gloom, right? So there's some really good things happening out there. We've seen schools and districts make significant efforts to address these issues, especially if we start with sort of just the connectivity and the accessing of content and instruction. Districts are finding really creative ways to help provide those services. I've been really incredibly impressed by the way school offices of food and nutrition have quickly and efficiently set up meal distributions. That's been, that happened almost right away. Some schools and districts have worked with local government to increase access to broadband, in some cases even creating mobile hotspots in a van. Districts have attempted to purchase and disseminate devices for families in some districts. Obviously not without, problems, but they're doing that heavy lift. Some school buildings in certain districts have been set up as mobile learning centers. So there are a limited number of students that might gather in a school building with some supervision, access to technology and meals. in the spring, we saw a lot of schools try to sort of cobble together worksheets and send stuff home with students, very quickly, so that the students had access to something. But districts have worked really hard to create more engaging online content. But as someone who's been teaching online for a long time, and I know both you and Dr. Shatto have as well, we know how hard it is to get it right. Schools are still trying to figure out how to create user-friendly platforms. What is the cadence of the work that's supposed to happen? How much should students get independent time should they get? What does the asynchronous learning time look like? I have 2 middle schoolers, and just this week, in response to family and student feedback, the school actually implemented a number of changes. So I think that's the other thing to take away from this, is that this is new for all of us, and so they're adapting. I think that the changes that are happening are sort of from a user experience standpoint. One of the chief complaints was that students were struggling with self-management, trying to prioritize the workload when things were due all throughout the week. So the school's going to start implementing consistent due dates for all content, Thursdays and Sundays. Initially, the school was really focused on creating connections for students and having these house meetings, so these opportunities for students to come together and in a social time. But the family said, that's great, but we need more small group instruction and less meetings. So this was changed, and so I think there's it's evolving. So as I said, lots of time and energy has been spent to ensure that the course content is more engaging. But I think the persistent challenge for teachers is how to ensure that students are interacting with that content and that they're able to demonstrate mastery. In a typical classroom, teachers can walk around the classroom and monitor student progress and tap them on the shoulder to remind them to stay on track and pull small groups who need extra support. And doing this in an online space takes really an entirely different set of skills and experience. I know that our Masters of Arts in Teaching students are working really collaboratively in these little professional learning networks right now with veteran teachers around the state to explore how to leverage technology to engage students and how to actually use the tools that we have to do that progress monitoring and to make sure we're addressing the needs of students that aren't being successful right now. But that takes time and a significant investment from the district.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people a lot that when I moved from face-to-face to online teaching, it was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be. And that's, sort of at the post-secondary educational level, not fifth graders that, have a whole other host of challenges associated with them. So as you guys have probably been sort of noticing, we've been working our way up the ladder here a little bit, talking about families and students and educators. So I'd like to sort of move up a little bit to administrators, and I'd also like to bring Dr. Shatto into our conversation too. So Dr. Shatto, can you talk a little bit about what suggestions you have for administrators or teachers to address some of these challenges?
Sure, absolutely. So I think one of the things that COVID has created for us is an opportunity to rethink education and these issues of equity. And so in terms of addressing the challenges that schools face, I really suggest that we start by building partnerships. I think teachers and school administrators reach out and build partnerships with organizations. For example, I was just reading an article yesterday in ASCD, and they called out organizations like PCs for People and Everyone On, who work to connect families to free and affordable computers and internet services. So there are organizations like that. And there are a lot of nonprofits that may have services that can support your students. So I would encourage our administrators to kind of reach out to the local organizations in your community and see how you might be able to partner to help students. In addition to that, I also recommend building partnerships with a diverse set of stakeholders because I think they can help guide decision-making processes to ensure that students with underserved needs are still part of the conversation. And I think probably most importantly, we can build relationships with families. And I think the key question there is, how can we provide information in easy and comprehensible ways so that any caregiver, regardless of who they are, can support the children in their care. And there are a few ways I think that we can do that. First, we can create and maintain centralized, clear, regular communication, a hub or a spot where families can go to get information about the resources that are available through the school or the district. I think also we need to think about using multiple means to engage families. So whether that's trying to reach them by phone, creating tutorial videos, using language translation for our families for whom English might not be their first language. So I think we need to kind of invest some time in thinking about how we can reach out to families. And I think along with that, providing guidance on resources, especially for most vulnerable populations. So where can they go to get meals or counseling services or social services that might be available? What technology resources are available to students who maybe don't already have it at home? What kind of supplemental educational resources might be available for students who need those? And I think another way that we can engage families in this process is to do some projects that kind of engage everyone in the family. So I've seen some great examples being passed around by my teacher friends, like, simple things like including math into family meal planning so that students are practicing their fractions or whatever, or giving students literary concepts to look for in movies and TV shows, and they can do that with their parents and guardians and siblings. And so I think there's a lot of ways to kind of engage our families. And I think the other piece of advice that I would give is it's important for us as educators to stay focused on professional learning. And I know that it can seem really overwhelming right now, but there's a lot of informal professional learning that's happening that you can be a part of, including some formal opportunities as well. But there are so many resources out there right now, especially about trending hot topics like social emotional learning, addressing bias, differentiating support, trauma-informed teaching, all of those topics that can help us connect with our diverse learners. And so I would say don't be afraid to tap into your personal learning network or your PLN. And if you're not sure how to do that, my suggestion is to start with Twitter. There's lots of educators on Twitter who are having conversations about distance learning and virtual learning. Lots of great educational chats going on Twitter. If you prefer Facebook, there are groups on Facebook. I'm part of a group called Shake Up Learning, and it's just teachers from all over the country brainstorming, troubleshooting with each other. There are professional organizations like ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education. They have a virtual conference coming up. There are podcasts. So there's really a wealth of learning materials that are available. And I would say, don't forget to take time out for your own personal professional development. Because I know teaching in a pandemic can seem really overwhelming, but I do think we can work to build these partnerships with each other and with families and help support students.
Thanks. That's all really great advice. And I think we can probably all agree that the human connection and the human and the personal side of stuff is incredibly important for this as well as a lot of other topics. But in addition to the human side, I was wondering if you could talk about some ways that technology can be leveraged to meet the needs of diverse learners as well.
Sure. As the ed tech person, this is sort of my favorite thing to talk about. So yeah, we can absolutely leverage technology to really make content accessible to students, and especially our students with diverse learning needs. And so the question that I'm always asking myself is, what strategies and tools can I use to engage every learner in a digital environment? And so I have, just a few suggestions. The first thing I think is that we can think about our common accessibility features and tools that might assist learners. Often these tools are built into your operating system, whether you're using Windows or Chrome or Mac. What I mean by accessibility features are things like speech to text. So if you have a student maybe who has difficulty writing and is better kind of dictating their words, you can use a speech to text tool that will allow them to kind of talk into the computer and have the computer write out their text. Things like closed captioning. You know, we might have students who are in an environment where watching a video is really difficult, you know, because they're not in a quiet space. So closed captioning is a great tool where they can kind of read the captions and still follow along. YouTube has a really great, I think, pretty easy to use captioning tool if you're needing to make closed captions. There are things like keyboard shortcuts. For those students maybe who have difficulty manipulating a mouse, you can set up keyboard shortcuts, and that just helps them be less frustrated and more efficient. And then there are also things like screen readers. A popular one on Windows is JAWS. So sure, absolutely. We can leverage technology to really make content accessible to students with diverse learning needs. I think an important question that I always ask myself is what strategies and tools can be used to engage every learner in a digital environment? So some suggestions that I have are to think about common accessibility features and tools that might assist learners. Often these tools are built into your operating system, whether you're using Windows or Chrome OS or Mac OS. And when I talk about accessibility features, I'm talking about things like speech to text. So if you have a student maybe who has difficulty writing or typing, and maybe it's better for them to dictate their words, speech to text will do that for you. There are also things like closed captioning for videos. That's especially important if you have a student who maybe doesn't have a quiet space to listen to some videos. Being able to read those captions can be very helpful. There are also things like keyboard shortcuts. So if you have a student who has difficulty manipulating a mouse, you can set up shortcuts for them, which can make things much more efficient. Or if you have students maybe who have difficulty reading a lot of text on the screen, there are screen readers. JAWS is a popular one for Windows. I use ChromeVox. It's a Chrome extension that will read the screen for you. And these tools just make navigating online content easier for students. I would also say consider the ways technology can be used to differentiate learning. If we think about the principles of universal design for learning, or UDL, first we have our multiple means of engagement. So how can we help students understand the why of learning and motivate them to engage? Then we have multiple means of representation, which is how can we present content in different ways? And I think technology is really useful when we talk about multiple means of representation. So you can vary the content that you're presenting to students. Maybe some of it is text-based, but maybe some of it is video or interactives or presentations, audio, just presenting that content in different ways so that students with different learning preferences can access it. And the last principle, multiple means of expression, I think technology presents us the opportunity to offer voice and choice in how students demonstrate learning. So there are lots of different web tools out there where students might be able to make a video to show what they know, or you know, maybe they prefer to write and they'd like to write a paper, or maybe they want to record a podcast or something like that. So there's a lot of choices out there for hitting those multiple means of expression. I would say also we can use technology to break the monotony. There's so many great tools and applications, videos, digital manipulatives, simulations. I know this is an old one, but When I used to teach 8th grade, my students loved to do the virtual frog dissection. So, there's lots of great tools out there. It doesn't have to be lecture and practice every day. And I think the last tip that I'll give is just to keep in mind that we might need to model what good distance learning looks like for students and practice it with them. I was just reading a blog the other day, and the teacher was writing how he didn't realize that his students didn't think about the fact that they could pause a video, or that they could rewind it and review the content again, or that they could pause and take notes. Like they sort of felt like they had to watch the entire thing in one sitting. And so, I think we should be careful about making assumptions about what students know about being able to learn with technology, and that we might need to model it for them. So those are my tips.
Thanks. I completely agree that, online learning is a new thing for a lot of people, and sort of trying to walk people through all of the nuances is certainly something that we all need to be mindful of and take on to ourselves, especially as educators, to remind students of simple things like pausing a video. It's okay to pause and go to the bathroom and come back, and it's always there for you. So I can see from the time that we're running out of time for today. So I just want to thank you both for being here, and thank you for a great conversation. And you, the audience, I want to thank you for being here as well. And I hope you'll continue to tune into these webinars. I want to remind you that we're holding them every couple of weeks, and we'll be continuing them through both the fall and the spring. And they're going to be on a variety of topics, and I know you're going to find something that's interesting. So with that, I want to thank Dr. Simonsen and Dr. Shatto for joining us, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Thanks.